in the right places? There we go. Pō everybody. Welcome to the 6th WOW Summit. If this is your first event, I'm very excited to have you here. If this is not your first event, I hope that you've had a lovely first couple of days enjoying the summit, meeting other inspirational and inspiring people. My name is Annabelle Burgess. I'm on the board of trustees of WOW, along with Monique. And do we have any other trustees in the room? It might just be us, but we've got our volunteers down the back, so make sure that you say hi and give them a wave as well. Health and safety is my job. That's the boring part of the evening. But if there is an emergency, we're just all going to head out the doors here. We've got a meeting point out the front. I think that's all that we need to know on that one. Bathrooms outside, down the stairs. There are disabled toilets on this floor if anyone needs those. And have I missed anything important? I think those are the two things that I need to cover. Really looking forward to having this talk. I'm going to hand over to Monique to introduce our speakers, the topic for this evening, and start the discussion. So.
Welcome everyone to Ripon, and I think it's really fitting that we are in this amazing building at Ripon, which has been made actually from timber that was milled here from the site, incredible architecture from McLean, our local architect, and it's such a beautiful space to be in. So I'm going to get distracted by the vacuum here because I get to see the view and you don't, which is fantastic. I'm really excited about this conversation because I think that we've had such a huge shift. We've been having these discussions since 2018 in the building sector, and it's incredible to see the mindset shift that's gone on. So this year we've really started to look at what is it like with systems thinking and building, like thinking actually about the whole system and how we are building. But before we go into the panel discussion, and we've got, just for note, we've got Susan Krumdieck, who is waiting for us on Zoom, coming in from the Orkney Islands. So we're going to be quite strict with time because she's conference to get off to. She was up at 5 a.m. this morning doing a tech check with us. So I'm excited to bring her into this space. But before I do, I'm going to introduce these two up here who are live with us. And first of all, Marcus, who is going to, Marcus Allen, who's got Àrbol in Cromwell, who I've visited their site, and it was absolutely mind-blowing what he's doing. So we've got a builder, an architect, and an engineer that we're going to talk with tonight. And we're going to start with a presentation from Marcus, and then we're going to go to Campbell McNeill, who's going to give us a really good overview of what they're doing at Ahha Studios. And again, that'll be really exciting to see. But first and foremost, Marcus, over to you.
Kia ora, everybody. Thank you for coming. So yeah, thank you, Monique, for introducing me. We have created Àrbol in Cromwell. What we were looking at doing was being super disruptive to the way we construct homes here in New Zealand. We're fed up with our poor housing standard causing detrimental health issues, and also building homes that were super expensive to run. So for us, we're looking at how we can change that. For us, prefabrication was a must. Why? Because we can manage our waste and our consumption through our builds, and also control the environment that we're building in. For me, I was working in Camp Orkney in 2016 and was exposed to better building standards from the petal system and knowing how to reduce our waste and our toxicity in our building envelopes. So from that, I was able to also learn high performance building and passive house. So I've become, since then, a passive house tradesperson, so that I can really support what we're doing with Àrbol and building a better, comfier home for our clients. And also having a less or a reduced impact on our environment to ensure that our future generations have a place that they can grow and survive and thrive in as well. This impact's all been driven by the need of our own standards. When I brought family to Queenstown in 2020, my son was 6 months old. We're living in damp, cold, mouldy homes. Now, I'm sure all of you have been exposed to these living conditions in the past, and the detrimental impacts that was causing to my son at 6 months old. He was getting asthma and respiratory problems. As a father, that really upset me. Knowing there's a better way, as I say, working on high performance homes and better housing standards in New Zealand, but not implementing it through my own role. So we moved from that home and went into a house that was the code minimum. The bare legalities of building here in New Zealand. What an achievement. That house was now costing me over $1,000 a month to keep warm. Gone from a home that was killing my family, my 6-month-old son, to a home that was killing my bank account. Now that's not fair. And all I saw was going around the district and seeing the exact same conditions, if not worse. But the people didn't have the power to change that. So for me, I was fortunate enough, broke my leg really bad and took a year off work so I could really stop the way I was doing it. Called a halt, ground the team back down to one, just me and my apprentice at the time. And that's when Àrbol was formed. We had a year to plan and figure out, how do we make this change? So for me, Àrbol was formed. Me and Chloe sat there and deliberated for well over a year and chose the sectors we were going to target. Instead of just going for the one, hey, we're going to do a high performance home and passive house and that's us. We're like, how can we make such an impact so that we know that Hendrik's future can be better? We know that not just his future, all the other kids and the other lives around us in New Zealand can get a better footprint and show the disruption and be a real leader in that change. So for us, prefab, how we can be environmentally responsible, not just sustainable. Look at energy costs and reducing energy consumption in a home. And that's the fundamentals of Àrbol, basically. And since then, in 2020, we opened factory doors, and we've done about 18 homes now, I believe, around the country. So gone as far as Central Otago, have sent homes to as far as Tutukaka in the North Island, and a lot in the local regions around here as well. So we know that we can make an impact, not just in our local region, but nationwide. So thank you. Yeah, here's a little video of the factory and a bit of process from the year.
It's really, I think when you go, and I feel like I'm a pop-up marmot actually here. I think when you actually go and visit the site in Cromwell and you go in and you see in this hangar these two amazing buildings that are being built, and we'll talk a little bit also about the equity and the housing equity that you're creating by building these as well a bit later, but it is really incredible to go into these units and go, oh my gosh, they just need to be put onto a nice slab somewhere or It's incredible. Thank you so much, Marcus.
Yeah.
I'm going to get Campbell to come up.
Mine's going to be a slightly different format, so, and hopefully I don't go too long, so apologies in advance. Nā hau I whā, nā waka o tēnei iwi putanawa, tihei Māori ora, ko te rana te whakapaparanga mai, engari ko Campbell, ko Otipoti te kāinga, ko Otipoti te whenua tupu, ko McNeill taku whānau. He kai hoa o I Ahha, ko Campbell taku ingoa, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora everyone, I'm Campbell from Ahha Architects. We're a values-led architectural practice, so we strive to broaden the way that we work, and we're a mixture of designers and makers and facilitators, and we're across Aotearoa. I'm going to kind of jump through some of these slides knowing that time is of the essence. We have offices up in Tamaki Makaurau, Otipoti Dunedin, and here in Wanaka. So our practice is set up and constitutionally ingrained around the purpose of trying to seek out regenerative outcomes within Aotearoa. So we want to work collaboratively and collectively to start building towards that. And we do that through a different approach of making and doing. So I'll be talking a bit about what drives us and what we're doing to implement and tweak processes to seek better outcomes. And also, bear with me, I'll just get my notes up. And how we're working within local systems to try to find problems and solve those problems locally. So the context that we're working within is the built environment, and that context is built up with layers of other contexts, so ecological, social, economic, and cultural. And for us, sustainability means to look at all four of those contexts and respond to them. Without looking at all of them, we don't believe that we're truly being sustainable. To kind of dive through some stats really quickly to set some context, in terms of ecological context, the construction industry globally accounts for nearly 40% of global carbon emissions when compared to aviation industry, which is around 2%. There's a huge impact there that we can start to look to mitigate. And when we look at the global waste produced, we similarly around a third of global waste produced from the construction and demolition industry is a huge proportion, and that's kind of made up of some going to landfill and some going to clean fill. Within the social context, the built environment accounts for nearly a quarter of global deaths, and there's over a quarter of people living in substandard living conditions. I'll kind of talk to these all as we go, but when you compare that to GDP, which is how a lot of people measure economic prosperity, the construction industry is only really accounting for a minute amount at around 5% of global GDP. And when you start comparing that to some of these social and ecological contexts, it's completely disproportionate. And it's something that we really need to bear in mind and see that there's opportunities to really respond to that. So also in terms of when we're looking at housing, which is going to feed into a lot of the latest discussions, globally, there's just over a quarter, around 30% of housing globally is affordable. So that means the rest, people are just not able to afford the places they're living in. It's terrible. Further cultural context, looking at global projections for 2050 at around 9.9 billion people, we're going to have a huge amount of that population as climate refugees, which is hugely detrimental to our relationship with our place and our identities and how we relate to the context we work within, which is hugely damaging to culture. And then of the listed heritage, built heritage globally, we're looking at two-thirds that are of significant heritage, which are in poor state of condition. So at risk in terms of how we preserve our cultural heritage. So for us at Ahha, we think that the way that the context that we're working with is presenting to us, we need to be more responsible. The construction industry as a whole, but as architects, we believe that we have a really significant responsibility to respond to this. And to do that, there's a number of ways we're dealing with that. One of is how we're broadening our roles as architects within the industry to start testing out different things. So the top left, we've got a batch that we're looking at, which is co-owned, and we're helping support a group coming together to facilitate the co-own and development of that batch. Bottom left is a newspaper produced in Dunedin, which is about engaging the public around how they want to make their city and see it change in the future. The top middle slide is an artistic project, which is about representing how we're engaging with our public spaces and how toilets and kind of social contexts that exist within our public realm are represented and are either accessible or inaccessible. And the bottom right is a director-led project looking at housing development in Auckland to strive for the highest standards of environmental building. So in terms of our everyday process, we have what is called the Ahha Impact Framework. This has been derived from the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and the purpose of it is to use it as a tool to bake in sustainability at the forefront of projects, carry them through, and measure outcomes as we go, so that we can hold ourselves accountable, but we can also report and hold stakeholders accountable, whether that be communities or investors. And that's made up of 6 domains. So carbon, which looks at embodied carbon, how much energy has gone into making something, versus operational carbon, which is about how much energy will be consumed in the long run, much like what Marcus is talking about around passive house. And then other domains like ecology, circularity, equity and access, health and wellbeing, community and culture. Some of these things, if you were at the material cultures workshop earlier, started engaging in some of these domains. But today, I'm going to work more into the equity and access domain as an example. So we use a few different tools within equity and access to try to make every single project seek better outcomes in this domain. So one of them is participatory process, which is about including people within the outcomes of their cities. So working with WHOIs and understanding what people's needs are and designing to respond to that. So the result of that are things like fit-for-purpose facilities and spaces and buildings which actually reflect communities and cultures that we're working with. And some other outcomes within this domain are things like physical, financial, and socio-cultural accessibility. So we want these places to be for all people. So to kind of explain that, a city where I'm based for our collective of architects is in Ōtepoti, Dunedin, and it's a place which has got a similar narrative to a lot of places nationally and globally around affordability and access of housing. So since 2015 alone in sales prices, we've seen a 150% increase in cost of a new home, and in rental we've seen about 45% in a similar period, but more 2017. And in terms of severe deprivation, we're looking at 55 people to the 10,000 with a housing register waitlist of 31 to the 10,000. So when we all started forming this group, we were over in Europe, and we were taking an interest and focus into some of the models that we saw overseas around housing models and delivery. And when we came back, some of our early commissions started engaging in that a bit more in the New Zealand context, and we worked with a research group up in Tamaki Makaurau for Iki Panuku around exploring different housing models that started filling a gap between one end of the housing continuum and the other. And one thing that's really important about this diagram that some of you may not be able to read because of how small it is that we have kind of public housing, community housing on the left, which is all supported, through to market housing, which is your freehold titles to get a standalone house, for example, or rental market. So this middle area is really underrepresented in New Zealand, and that's things like subsidised rentals, shared ownership, where we're starting to see a little bit more with government work and some of the community housing sector. But so models like community land trusts and cooperatives, cooperatives we see a lot of out of Austria, and community land trusts models that were born in the US and have grown in popularity in the UK, and starting to see kind of models of them here. And it's one that we have taken a particular interest in. So we've facilitated the establishment of the Ōtepoti Futures Trust, which is a community land trust model. Now, the purpose of that trust is to hold and redevelop property for affordable outcomes for community in perpetuity, whether that be housing or community space or commercial space. The main thing with a community land trust is on the left here we have kind of a typical market purchase where someone who wants to own a home will come in and buy a house and land package, which is within a freehold tenure title. And on the right, the distinct difference with a housing situation is where a purchaser would come and buy the land, the property, well, the building, and the land underneath it would still be owned by the land trust, and there would be say, 100-year lease for that land, which is the nominal amount, and it's something you might see in a model in the Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust, where they have a different scheme there, which is similar to this. So a community land trust is all based around a city's needs and interests. So it will expand to respond to needs. So it can be in community and commercial space or residential space. And the first project that this community land trust is embarking on is 332 Moro Place, which is the Otago Pioneer Women's Memorial Hall. This is an old lovely picture of it in monochrome. And this is a more contemporary proposal for it. So the existing community that had this building, the Women's Association, wrapping up and wanted to kind of find a new a guardian for this project, for this building, and they've donated this building to the Ōtepoti Futures Trust for the purchase price of $1. And I was just going to get my notes up, aware that it's 6:29, so I'll try to work through it. Yeah, so with this process, we went through a participatory process. We held hui's, worked with different community groups and stakeholders, from existing users to heritage community and so on. And we found that there was an opportunity to expand the use of this building and support through subsidised desk space for small businesses and community organisations. And downstairs there's an existing hall which we're upgrading and repurposing so that it can still be rented out to community groups, but also with an anchor tenant that is favourable for a slightly different tenancy, where out of hours they could let it be used for community use. So maintaining a community function to the building, but balancing a model so that it was financially sustainable. So the existing building was, its potential utilisation is mapped out at about 5%, so that diagram up on the right there. And with the renovation and extension upstairs and the really intensive programming to the functions that we're looking at about a 70% utilisation of the building, which massively increases its potential for self-sustaining and also giving back to the community. So the idea is that all of the different lease agreements between the tenants will pay towards the use of the building, and then any profit after cost will go towards the Ōtepoti Futures Trust, which then will be recycled into land purchases or housing property developments and so on. So it becomes a recycling of capital within Dunedin rather than a for-profit enterprise. So this kind of abstract diagram is a logo for the Futures Trust, land, and community or city amenity, and then housing. And this idea that through the different options there, money will recycle back and it will further expand its portfolio. So what's next? Some things that we talk about in terms of the restrictions to supplying affordable housing in New Zealand are things like land. So what you'll probably be aware of is the inclusionary zoning that's occurring in the Queenstown Lakes District, which has happened before and is starting to be reintegrated into policy. And a land trust is based around donations, whether it be capital or land. So inclusionary zoning kind of works hand in hand with that, and that's why the Queenstown Lakes Community Trust is kind of benefiting on that for the community. But we don't have that in Dunedin, so we have started discussions with some faith groups and some other community organisations around the provisioning of land for, say, housing or other building assets which might become available that could just be included in the portfolio and then expand on that recycling of capital into other projects. The materials within the building industry are really expensive. Something touched on today was the duopoly in the industry and how the cost of materials is really hard to overcome. But there's been some kind of table discussions around the purchasing of a trade store to then access wholesale materials and bring down that cost. And then finance, with that continuum I previously presented, there are like numerous ways of looking at how financial systems can be changed, or shared equity could be included, or build-to-rent models could be included on a land trust model, which is about securing that perpetual long-term affordability of housing. And then something that Marcus has already dived into is prefabrication, which is really addressing a labour component. So where we look at opportunities to mechanise our building process to find efficiencies and utilise economies of scale, we can bring down those unit prices. Also in the likes of standardising design plans and so on. So there's a lot of things that have been looked into with the trust, and the horizon is bright, but it's all stepping stones really. Yeah, so that's me. But I guess in terms of like how that relates to equity and access, the key thing for us is to understand the context that we're working within and see where the levers are to make change. And we know that, you know, through collaboration and working with local teams, we can actually seek out really regenerative outcomes for our cities and country. So yeah, thank you.
Huge thank you. I think this is going to give us some really good context for the rest of the discussion. I'm going to take like 30 seconds just to get rid of that little pop-up thing and to get Susan into the room. So just give me 30 seconds. Before I do, so tonight we're going to have Menti for questions, because for our online audience as well, they're able to participate and ask questions. So go to your phone, make sure it's on silent, but go to menti.com and then enter the code 24575981. So pop that into your phone so that you can ask some questions of the panel afterwards. Susan, thank you so much for, one, being up at 5 a.m. to do the tech check with us to make sure everything was running, which it was at 5 a.m. for you. I just wanted to hand it over to Susan for a bit to go into transition engineering and talk, and just if you can give it a sort of a bit of an overview of your area of work and expertise and what you've been doing.
Sure. I guess firstly, I grew up in a remote mountain town in Colorado, and Colorado has its share of resort destination places. And so the Queenstown thing, I recognized it when we got to New Zealand in 2000. I came to New Zealand to take a position at Canterbury University teaching mechanical engineering. And that is the art of getting fossil fuel into the air. Basically, that's what we're good at. But it does lots of useful things on the way, right? Now, let's relate that to resort towns. Resort towns exist because of oil. Right? Therefore, the downshift, the retirement of oil, because that's what's coming next, what does that mean for the resort town? What does that mean? I know the struggles of resort towns trying to understand what's the place of the people who actually live there, who provide the services, who make it an interesting place. What's the role of the people who come? I know there's that really wicked, interesting dynamic going on, but now you have to layer on top of that the future and the retirement of the oil age. So lots of fun things going on there. And that retirement of the oil age fascinated me. And I thought New Zealand would be a great place to even have that conversation, because in America, that conversation was not going to happen for a while. We were going to scrape every last drop out of the barrel first. So somebody has to look at that problem and figure out what's going on. Well, if you look at the peak and decline of the oil age as a risk, as something that we aren't prepared for, as something that our systems will fail under those conditions, then you start to wonder, well, is engineering up to this task? And the answer is, of course it is. Every time one of our brilliant man-made systems creates a massive man-made disaster, then the field of engineering, the professionals in engineering, go through what's called a corrective transdiscipline. We figure out what it is that needs to change and the processes that we're going to use, and we're going to teach to the young in university, and we're going to hold each other to account in our ethical standards. And we just do that. So you know about fire safety, you know about highways, traffic safety. There's all sorts of these things, product safety, food safety. They all follow massive fails in profitable engineered systems. So this time, can we do it again? Can we look at this transition to where we're going to get over the feeling that it's got to be zombie apocalypse? That's how we're going to do that. And say, okay, well, it's just another one of these corrective changes. Therefore, engineering must change. And so that's what my PhD students and my colleagues worked on in Canterbury for 20 years or so. What would that look like? Let's learn from everything we've done before. Let's bring in the design thinking and the systems thinking and the circular stuff and the, everything we've got to this probably hardest massive problem, because it's so systemic. It's throughout everything. And it goes to the root of our essential needs, what we must have to get through this day, just to do our thing. And when we did that, we found that with this sort of thing, it's all about process. It's all about knowing where to start and having a way to work through. And that, if it is very clear and based on a lot of research and science about how we think through things, how we do things, then we can change engineering and we can deliver this corrective discipline into the profession. And so that's what we called transition engineering. Why didn't we call it sustainability engineering? Well, because sustainability engineering already existed. And the difference between sustainability engineering, how it manifested, and transition engineering is that sustainability engineering, you're looking for solutions. You're looking for the green thing. And the problem is the brown thing. So saying what's unsustainable and working on changing that to what's survivable, that's sort of a different project. You keep going with your sustainability. We want all the green things we can find, but you also have to manage that retirement of the oil, gas, and coal age. It is not going to be easy, but it'll be doable. So that's what I've been working on, and I was recruited by Heriot-Watt University after my book came out in 2020 to set up a transition engineering training program online that could reach people around the world, and we're aiming for 10,000 graduates from a little online course that just steps through this process that we've developed, and to set up a research center in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland to deliver these kind of projects, to just get on with it and build those examples and use cases that we all need when we build a discipline, and to build a research center within Harriet Watt to figure out, okay, how in academia do we deliver these things? So that's what I'm up to, why I'm up at 5 in the morning, because I'm in Scotland.
Susan, I'm just going to ask another...
Hopefully the internet hasn't let us down again.
I'm going to just ask you another question around when we first had our conversation and we were looking at, and I think, Campbell, I'm going to ask you the question afterwards as well, is the importance of, we know that we've got this big goal and we need to get rid of the brown stuff, as you were saying, and we need to start looking at what a post-fossil fuel world looks like, which is essentially what in the resilience workshop this afternoon, they were actually the community response groups. One of their scenarios is how do you actually cope or how do you build a community that is fit for that? And there was a study, I think, that came out that said that was going to be in the 60s or 70s, so in a couple of decades, that it was going to be either too costly or there won't be enough of it. So it's quite soon, really. When you are actually teaching this, though, to students, you use a really unique framework. And I just wanted you to sort of unpick that and talk about sort of how you get your students to step through the process to really imagine and then look at what could be.
Okay, we seem to be a little bit frozen, so I'm not sure if you can still hear me.
Yes, we can.
Oh,
all
yeah.
Good.
Okay, we're back. Right. I took the answer to your question from my 20 years of experience teaching thermodynamics. There is nothing more confusing and mind-boggling than thermodynamics. So how do I get students to take on that strange project of figuring out how to make a thermodynamic cycle work and design it and understand it, etc.? And the answer is that you understand what it is you're working on. So what's the actual thing? Is it a plane? Is it a power plant? What is it? And then you just trust that if you follow a method, that method step by step will produce the knowledge. And the method has to have fundamental first principles truths at every step. So you're applying first principles. So in the transition engineering method, we start with the recognition that the projects we're working on are wicked. We don't want to change them. Society doesn't know what you're talking about, this change. So we just own it. We have a way to work with stakeholders to work through the wicked problem. That was a big breakthrough, because otherwise you can't work on anything if you can't say, okay, what is it we're going to work on? And don't jump to solutions. That is so important. You have to work through to a project. So we school ourselves not to use the word solution anymore. We try and figure out the next step, and that's a different thing. And then the first step in the process is to time travel to 1911. Because that's a thing we can understand. We can understand ourselves in 1911. In 1911, basically, there are no new inventions that are going to come that will surprise anyone. Basically, we're there. We already have everything. There's planes, there's international wireless communication, there's cars, trains, etc. So nothing new is coming, but the world is going to change in really interesting ways. So we go to 1911 and look at systems that operate at a safe level of fossil fuel consumption that are basically us. There are my grandparents, the youngsters' great-grandparents there. And we just understand that there are an infinite number of options. The way we're doing things right now feels like the only way, but there are so many ways that we can actually engineer and co-design and develop to do things. Understand economics differently, understand rules differently, understand who's entitled to what differently. So that's a good starting point, is to go outside, away from the wickedness of the problem, and study something that we can study.
I think that's really interesting how you are using time and perspective to actually look at the history, because it's often when we go back in time and we can actually understand how the system developed that we can start to see what were the triggers that actually made that system in the first place. And that's when you can sort of go, well, what if we did this, knowing the levers to pull. And I'll go back at another point, and I want you to explain your students and what they thought of Queenstown. But before we do, I just want to go to Campbell, because you had a really interesting framework, and I'm in love with the graphics, and if anyone wants to get his logo and take it offline, good luck, because you cannot get it. It moves all the time. I love your graphics. It's just awesome.
Or you can just send it to you.
But also sort of that thought, and that just even the wanting to have a new framework, and what was the thinking behind we need a new way of thinking in the process to get there for the team?
Well, there's definitely some similarities to what Susan's talking about in terms of process, but also not finding a solution straight away. Like the framework is supposed to be adaptable and able to be used in many different scales and across many different projects. So we spent a lot of time developing it, but in terms of how it's used, it's super dynamic. So on any single project we have, we'll start with, before we do any design, we'll start with a discovery stage, which is about understanding a context of what we're dealing with, which is kind of similar, I think, to the wicked problems statement, and diving deep into that context pragmatically and within those domains that I mentioned. But what we do is really set up the parameters and the constraints and the opportunities for a project, whether it be a house or whether it be a community building or a landscape project. And the idea is that you're not saying this is the solution to what you're doing, but this is how we are mapping out the process to then integrate that through every step of the way, and we can then use that to drive solutions which will come later, and measure those outcomes to see how we're tracking and so on. Yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
No, I think it has. I think, you know, when you look at those systems and you've got something in place that is actually, or that framework, you're actually creating that new system. And it's really good to know that it's an iterative process, that it's something that's really dynamic, and that it's shifting all the time, because things do shift all the time. There was another thread of the conversation, and you brought it into your discussion really well, Campbell, but I think that, Marcus, I want you to kind of have a little bit of a go on this one first, because I think your process is looking good, looking really at this as well. There's a huge issue and challenge around equity in housing, and how do we actually incorporate that social element, like in your framework, talking and bringing people to the heart of it. And for a long time, passive housing has been out of reach for so many people. So we're looking at, you know, how do you afford a house for one, but how do you actually afford a house that is built correctly, where you can be warm and where you can actually not have the energy uses. So you're looking at that future where you're not going to have fossil fuel. And I just want you to go a little bit into how you've gone and looked at that model, going from Glenorchy, which is a multi-million-dollar build, to doing what you're doing.
Yeah, no, good question. So for us, it's coming from a material level, right? And building better, not bigger, was one of the key elements that we're looking at there. So New Zealand has a distorted illusion that we need a huge home, right? And we all need to live in an individual house, like you've alluded to here, Campbell. For us, it was, how can we live in a house that's going to work and tend to the needs of the occupant throughout its life cycle, instead of just having a home that competes with your neighbours. So for us, that's building smaller footprints, but building wiser is a good term, I suppose, because if we can construct a home that's energy efficient, it's going to bring down your total cost of product long term. A lot of people are looking at flashy new items to go into the home instead of going, what is my energy consumption? How is my power bill going to affect my living costs? I told you about how my power bill in Queenstown was $1,000 a month. How can I make that power bill more like $100? Building smarter. That long term means we can have more money in our back pocket to bring down the cost of living to put into those items that we may want later on in life. So back to the question again, I'm getting on a bit of a tangent, so hopefully that's answering that question.
Just a little, like, passive house from Àrbol,
yeah.
Cost-wise?
Cost-wise, yeah. So going back to Camp Glenorchy, when I was working out there, the cost value for the homes, similar square meterage, was around $1 million to build a home to the same standard we're building. That is just unattainable. For us, we've brought that price point down to $290,000. So that's where prefabrication can help bring those costs right back down as well. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting in New Zealand with Kia Ora, who are also looking at passive homes and that cost for the user, bringing it down to something that's really affordable for them to not only run but be in, and also that healthy home concept, which is really interesting that you as a private design studio, I mean, it's quite revolutionary when you look at your go through and you're actually listening to your presentation, and I'm going and thinking about 6 years ago when we started having these discussions. It's huge progress to see a young design studio actually implementing this framework and looking at the world through that lens. What made you do it?
I guess kind of it's really back to the context we're working within, which I talked about at the start of the presentation. We've got huge issues within the built environment and the world that we're living in, and how we're depleting natural resources. And the opportunity to make a difference within our industry reflects on the responsibility that we have. And in terms of that really drove the desire to make a difference. I mean, we found that working in other practices around the world and locally that we were all very frustrated by the fact that no one was really looking at how they could just slightly change direction to start addressing these things. And that's really when we decided to just double down on focusing on how we could just make that a part of every day for us. Yeah.
You definitely took off one lens and put on a whole new other one. It's not just I think it is thinking totally outside the box, which is amazing. Susan, I'm going to ask you as well. What was your? I've got two questions for you actually. One from the audience, one from me. What was your moment where you said, I can't be that type of engineer who actually puts the carbon up into the air. I've got to be the one that draws it down. So what was that moment? And then there's a question from the audience. Do you want me to say it and give you a double bangy now, or would you like me to say it after you've answered the first one?
Well, actually, the internet cut out just as you were asking it. So ask the first question again.
Okay. So first question, what was your motivation behind not spewing fossil fuel into the air, but actually drawing it down and thinking how to do things differently?
Oh, there's a funny little motivation there. This remote mountain town where I grew up, one day started having smog, and all the salamanders died in our mountain lakes, and things were getting strange. And somebody had built a coal-fired power plant in Shiprock, Arizona, just over the hills from us, and the pollution was coming up into our valley. And I mean, it never got fixed. It's finally been shut down because it got to the end of its life. But over its lifetime, it has created mercury poisoning of all the fish in that whole area. It acidified the lake. So it's just this complete disaster for people who had nothing to do with it, who weren't benefiting, who weren't getting rich, who, the electricity was going to Phoenix, Arizona, going somewhere else so they could run air conditioners or do whatever they were doing. And so to me, I just thought, okay, who does this? Who builds these power plants? And why didn't they build it so it didn't do this? It turns out, of course, they could have, but I didn't have to. And so that question for me was, who did this? And I found out it was mechanical engineers. So I decided that's what needed some help.
I have another question from the audience, Susan, and I think in terms of this question could also be answered by Cam and Marcus afterwards, but what influence do you think our current global social and political upheaval will have on the transition engineering mission? So I guess the flip-flops we're seeing at the moment, how is this going to affect what you're doing?
All right. I think that society, our ability to be civil, the whole system is all sitting on top of engineered systems. If those systems break down, our ability to be civil and to organize ourselves and build community, et cetera, is diminished because we don't have the capacity to rebuild those systems. If you think about what Hollywood loves to show us, it loves to show us dystopia. And dystopia is where the systems that we don't understand, that we depended on, fail, right? So the plane crashes on a remote island and people can't even figure out what to do. That's us. So the question of how to manage the civil society through a transition has to be built on the trust that there will be change, but we will understand it. And that the people who are working on it are using science and known fact and trustable mechanisms. And that when we have to pay for these things, we understand what we'll get for them. So we sort of need to all get in the waka together and see that we're going to a new place, but that we're all equipped and we have to explore, really. You have to get into a mindset where solutions aren't delivered to us, the consumer, so we can consume. It's that we're all going exploring together, and we're not quite sure what it'll be like, but exploring is a thing we can do. We can navigate, we can trial and error, we can find our way through. So I think the answer is create the narrative that's fit for purpose for the mission.
I think in terms of, and I'm going to ask the three of you because I think, different areas of the sector, and I think it's a really interesting one to go into. How have you seen that mindset shift since you have started your career? Has there been one? And to what extent do you think the movement and everybody on the waka is knowing what they are doing? Do you think, how much more do we need to do? Is there more education? Maybe in terms of, I'll start with the builders.
Yeah, cool. So from a building perspective, does anyone really have a true direction? Do we know exactly where we're going to end up? We've got goals and achievements that we're trying to reach, right? Targets. So for us, it's just turning the lights on and setting the journey towards the right outcome. We know where we're going to go, but there's going to be bumps along the road, so it's just making a start. So for us, creating a purpose, knowing the end goal is to achieve targets set by government, but also creating that change now instead of just waiting for other people to do it. So yeah, from a building perspective, I think just making the conscious effort just to start. Do we know exactly where we're going to end up? Well, hopefully we end up near the target, right? Throwing a dart in the dark is blind, but if we've got a target to hit, we at least know where we're going, right? So, yeah.
I guess simply put, I don't think we're doing enough. And I think there's examples of really holistic approaches to sustainability globally, and I think in New Zealand we have some examples, but are more fractured across the industry rather than as a really focused holistic approach to the built environment. And I mean, at a practice level, we are trying to align ourselves to industry innovation as well, which is quite similar to one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But the idea is that, similar to what you're saying, we need to make a start and we need to head in that direction. And when we start to polish the way that we do it and bring people along on the journey, we hope for that to expand and it become more accessible. And I guess to one of the questions earlier around why we started the framework, it wasn't for it to be complicated. It was to try to make it easy to bring it into everyday practice, you know. So we don't want it to be hard for people to come on this journey. It's not thoughtless, but we don't want it to be hard either, you know. We want it to be easy.
I think in terms of everyone on the panel, what's really intrigued me and a common theme with the three of you has been education. And I think from bringing builders into the site and showing them what you're doing on a practical sort of build through to, I think, what Ahha are doing with working with AUT. If anyone was in the workshop this afternoon around Materials Matter, looking at how you're actually taking that lead role. And also, I think, you know, from a huge perspective, the number of students that you have touched as well, Susan. And I just want, if you could answer that question around mindset shift, how have you seen it since you've started transition engineering? How have you seen that shift in the thinking around engineering? And is it going far enough and is it going fast enough?
Well, I really agree with the just get going. I mean, whatever opportunity you have to just do what does make sense going forward, just do it. There is still online the project called From the Ground Up that we did in Christchurch after the quakes. We had a bunch of students and a bunch of people motivated to say, okay, what if we don't rebuild, as in put back what was there, but rethink and redevelop, you know, reorganize, that sort of thing. And so we put together the best in building, the best in waters, the best in, what would you call it, finance? Like the places where we live. This is a thing that when we were working on this, it just amazed me that you build a place and somebody said, you know, $1 million something to build a house. And that house, if it's done right, should last for hundreds of years. And yet you're the one who had to pay for that. So aren't houses actually part of a place if they are in the right place, if they're serving a need for housing in a place that has the reason to be, then shouldn't we be able to think about the project of that building for a long term and financing in a different way, as a, you know, like a continuous society way? And that is really interesting because the way that we've got ourselves to thinking about property as something you flip, turn over, you know, you sell it again for another huge chunk of money that comes with its own huge chunk of financing. So that thing we said was weird in the first place of spending a huge amount of money to build a place, then you do that all again in 5 years and again and again. Like, no wonder we can't afford a place to live. So it's the finance system that's actually the problem underneath this whole thing. So that, yeah, that I guess you would call it holistic thing. All you can do is get going and then try to document that thinking and explain it and share it, and move on to method. And that's where the approach that the designers of buildings, that they're thinking long-term and they're thinking holistically. Those approaches are, if you overlaid them, the same as transition engineering, because they're approaches that say, okay, who are we? What are we doing here? What do we really care about? What do we value? What are the mistakes that we might make if we don't, you know, you get a chance to do it right or you're stuck with it. So let's avoid the mistakes. Let's look at the risks. And then let's ask, who are we going to be? What's fair? What do we value? What do we want? And then discrete projects along that journey. So that, you know, we didn't make this up. We did a lot of research and put together and layered together ways of navigating and becoming and building that work.
Okay, so I think it was one of the questions that we do want to add something to. Susan,
I just think that what Susan's just talking about is completely aligned to the way that we're thinking around trying to build a more equitable housing system in Dunedin, and it's about, you know, working with the systems that we've got and shifting them to find the outcomes that we're looking for and testing them along the way through different development projects and how they work with different finance models and different ownership models as well. It resonates with me that parallel is we've just got to get started, and we've got to understand that we have systems and we've got to work with them, and then we've got to find the ways to transition them towards the futures that we're looking for.
There's a really interesting question by the audience that I want to bring in because I think it really relates to this topic as well. And it's the question of ownership, and it's what is the cultural response to land trusts. But I think ownership in general, you know, if you put that word into our mouth, as I guess in a European concept, it has some sort of meaning. But if you're from an Indigenous community elsewhere, does it even exist? What is ownership? So it does bring in, if we want to bring it into questioning and interrogating and going, systems, have we set this up? It's ownership. Is it ownership? So I just want to put it out there. And Susan, as you as well, one of the questions is, what are the examples that you've seen of really interesting ownership structures that we need to start exploring, like concrete examples? I know that Ahha, what you're doing is the Community Land Trust is a really interesting example. What are the other types that we need to start thinking about? So maybe Susan, if you can, any examples you can think of from Scotland or elsewhere.
Actually, the example that came to mind was a transition engineering student project in Dunedin, because what we're finding when we look at that long time frame and whole system is that very often it's we've trapped ourselves into beliefs that we can question. And so the student was working on the problem of the student squalor in Dunedin, you know, where the students live. You know what I'm talking about? And that exists in Dunedin. There's this really horrible place where the students all pile in and live, which is deadly, you know. That exists because we accept it, not because it's okay. And so when we looked at what is underneath this acceptance of this being this way, we found a next step, which was to not accept it anymore. And so we actually worked with the Council of Dunedin, presented them with the student project result, which was, this is not acceptable. The landlords who have been running it are not meeting the needs of the community, and they're not operating to a standard that's acceptable. And so we're going to condemn those properties. We're going to create a university zone in that area for redevelopment. And we're going to now redevelop that area into appropriate, healthy, safe student accommodation, mixed integrated living with the sort of facilities that students need, because we are a university town. That Dunedin exists, around that university. It's integrated with it, and so we just don't accept treating of the young people in our civilization who are trying to learn and become what we need them to be. We're not accepting this anymore. So that's a thing that we're seeing in Scotland, is that acceptance boundary. Once you see that you don't have to accept the way things are, then you can go through a process of rewriting the rules. And why not do that?
Campbell, I know that you want to answer this.
Okay. So I agree with the acceptance piece.
He doesn't agree with the squalor thing.
No, I do agree with the squalor thing and the acceptance piece. I think, our housing market and this question around the cultural kind of shift around ownership, we currently get debt to buy property, to get the value to increase, to sell that property at a higher value, for someone else to get debt to buy that property, to it's absolutely screwed up, like it's wild. But I think what the land trust model is trying to do is say we don't accept that for the future of housing, and what we're not trying to do is saying anarchy, shut down the housing system, because as soon as you do macroeconomic policy and you shift the rates of interest, you get recessions, and when you enable, you get higher cost of housing. So it's an absolute conundrum the way in terms of politics. So the idea of the land trust is to actually create a parallel market, is to start to create land opportunities that are decoupled from capital gains and create long-term affordability. It's not to say we are replacing that, it's that we are creating a parallel market, and that will increase in its ability to provide housing and affordability in perpetuity for communities. So it's a non-acceptance position.
I have another question. Susan, are you able to stay with us for another 5 minutes? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. I have, we talk about, if we're really looking, we've talked a lot about fossil fuels and the need to start to really address carbon. I like how, Cam, you're looking at it from a really holistic point of view. And I think one of the things that we were looking at today in another discussion we were having is around the planetary boundaries. And we know that there's not just that overshoot in sense of climate change. We're also looking at essentially materials, because we're extracting too much from the earth. And this is a huge problem for the building industry, like you pointed out in your presentation. And I'm going to throw this one first at Marcus. Don't look at me like you're scared. But I think your vision to not do big but do small, and your thoughts around your materials footprint as well as your energy footprint, what was the thinking around that? And then I'm going to throw the question to Cam and then Susan.
Yeah, well, what makes building is material, right? Labour is a huge portion of what we do, but with the inflation that's happened over the past few years, we have to look to build smaller, because if we're just going to fill our rooms with more material, we're only creating more waste. So how can we cut down on the usage, but also design properly? From a design point, if we put our buildings and design them correctly, we can have less wastage or less material getting consumed. So definitely working with designers has helped us reduce our material, which is also looking at cost and inflationary rates of our build spend, more affordable to pass those savings on to our clients. Yeah.
Reduction. Yeah, I think we would agree to that position on trying to reduce what we spec and how we design, but also I think there's an element of the economies of scale kind of component in how we think about cities and how cities connected. And I think if we're building small houses on lots, that's quite a different story to building, say, 30 or 50 units within a multi-unit apartment building. Obviously, there's other cultural complexities around people's appreciation of their identity of a home and stuff like that, which come into that. But yeah, I would say we would look at that across different scales in terms of how we reduce, but we also look at economies of scale to try to seek out reductionism.
Scale, I think, is the benefit there. Hey, as you say, if we look to Europe, there's better living standards instead of just going singular homes. If we're going multi-density or creating community-style housing, it's definitely the way forward. It's going to be able to reduce total cost of product. Yeah.
I think in terms of the EU, and you'll be able to have an insight into this as well, Susan. A couple of years ago, I was in Luxembourg, and there was a developer there. He was doing 300 apartments. And one of their specs on their building project was 30% of the materials going into the building were from the circular economy. So they had already been used and they were bringing them back in, which when we're just addressing waste like we did this morning at the brekkie, it's a huge advance. But Susan, your thoughts around our materials footprint and transition engineering and how you're addressing that?
All right, yeah. So probably at the forefront is the building industry. They've actually gone there. Well, let's reduce the amount of materials. Let's look at efficiency. So they actually have made the progress to where we know we can build, long-lasting, low-energy, low-footprint buildings. All right. If you build them in sprawl, what have you done? So now we need to connect and create the space where those buildings can go. And that space is very often occupied by a old wooden tent, right? That's something that's well past its use by date. So that redevelopment project is interesting because you need to connect up the rebuild for the future with the fact, here's a fun fact, 50% of all energy used in New Zealand is oil. All right, so it's the oil, and of that, about a third is freight. We're moving our stuff around, and of that, the biggest ton-kilometer moved in New Zealand, so half of all ships, half of all trucks, half of all, is oil. Okay, it's just that bulk oil moving around, oil products, I guess I should say, not crude oil. So that has to retire. So what we use it for has to retire. So it isn't just the buildings, it's the activity system in which that building sits. People have to be able to have active access to their activities. So the whole urban plan, the whole way that businesses, workers, customers, services interact, don't just build the whole system. And that I think it is at the forefront now, and you can't lock in road transport into anything we build now. So that's a huge risk. Don't do it. So you've got the right product, the ability to do that, and the way to reduce the material use in our world is to just retire the oil.
I am going to end this conversation, although I was on a call with these guys setting up the conversation, and it just went on, and we could have gone for hours, I think. I really, really, really enjoyed the conversation. And thank you so much, Susan, for your patience and your grace with not getting us more frazzled than we were. Hopefully that seemed like a duck with feet going like this and smooth. I'm not sure it did, though. Just one last parting sort of question and comment or thought for the audience. What is it going to look like, the built environment and our communities in 100 years? You guys get a little.
Oh, it's so nice. We've been there. That project is a thing we keep doing. When you dare to imagine our settlements, our places where we live, not infested with 3-ton steel vehicles chewing through oil, you actually get a really nice place to live. It'll be fine.
Oh gosh, I haven't got time to draw this, but I guess we see our mission is to strive towards a regenerative Aotearoa, and what that looks like is the relationships between people and place and community and the environment being equitable. So healthy environments that we can all thrive in, and so that's what it looks like to us, and that's what we're heading towards.
From a practical point of view, I'd like to see the distortion between humanity and nature removed and be more in tune with nature. From the building aspect, I'd love the education to go right through the system to know that the efficiencies of construction, especially here in New Zealand, can make a major impact, and as well not a negative impact. So yeah, really focusing on the positive outcome, and 100 years time I'd love to be here and be able to see that, but hopefully my son gets the opportunity to see the footprints that we're leaving behind today. Yeah.
I might just leave it at that. That was gorgeous. I would like to really thank all of our panelists. This has been a really good big brain discussion. with everyone. Thank you so much for participating. Susan, I know you've got a conference to go off to now, so I'd like to say a huge thank you for your time and generosity and grace, I think, is what I think when I think of you. So thank you hugely for that.
We're going to go solve fuel poverty today.
Good luck with that. That's going to be easy. And thank you hugely to the audience. There were some amazing questions came out for those online. Thank you for tuning in as well. And I hope that everybody, this is day 2 of the WOW Summit over. It was a really good vintage today. I think there was some great discussions, quite enlightening, and this one has probably been the highlight out of the summit for me so far, so thank you for making that possible. And I will now leave it over to everybody to have some beautiful wine. Thank you to Ripon for being here to provide this space and the gorgeous drink that we are having from this, I would dare to say, regenerative space where they have thought about ownership differently. And go forward into the rest of the week. I hope to see you at the other events, and good luck. Thank you.
Kia ora.